As we're continuing our journey through the Gospel of John, we wrapped up our last time in John chapter 10, and we'll be starting chapter 11, but I want us to take a quick look at where we left off in John chapter 10. But I want us to be looking for three real attributes or elements of God that come under the most critical aspect of God, and that's God's sovereignty. It's no coincidence, I don't believe that it's a coincidence at all, that the last couple of weeks on our Wednesday nights, Joe's been talking about God and his sovereignty and how he's got this. This is done in his timing. These things aren't accident that's coming together. Even your trial or your temptation or your problem that you're going through didn't catch God by surprise. He's got a plan. When we think of verses like all things work together for God, for good to those who love God, according to his purpose, it's God saying, I got a plan despite what's happening in your life. Even despite what the enemy wants to work for bad, I got a plan. Now, that plan and how well it works out has a lot to do with how willing we are to go along with what God has planned. Many of us have missed God at many aspects of our life because we had to go with our own plan. We're looking today at God and his sovereignty. In John chapter 10, we left off last week. I'm going to just jump in the last time in verse 31. It said that the Jews took up stones again to stone him. The Jews were ready to kill Jesus. This is not the first time. He has spoken. He has revealed who he is. They've rejected him for who he is, and they're ready to take up stones to kill him. He continues in his dialogue with them, but we're going to jump down to verse 39. Therefore, they sought again to seize him, but he escaped out of their hands. And he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. So Jesus leaves Jerusalem. This occasion where he was having this dialogue and this encounter was on Solomon's porch in Jerusalem, and they had caught him. They'd actually kind of like cornered him and said, "They tell us plainly. Don't speak in mysteries. Don't speak in ways that we can't understand. Just tell us, are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ?" Because they weren't like, so that we'll know so we can serve you. They say, just go ahead and confess it so we can kill you. Just say it. Just I dare you. That's what they're doing. And Jesus, man, I've already told you. You ain't listening to me. I ain't got to tell you anything more. You don't want to listen to me. Matter of fact, I'm out of here. That's what he's doing. He's saying, I'm out of here. He tells them a few things, and then he goes on. Now, they were ready to kill him. But he left, and he went to Bethany beyond Jordan, where John had been baptizing first. And he goes over there. Why is he going over there? Because the Jews are ready to kill him, and it's not his time. God has timing. And he keeps good time. And he knows what he has planned. And the Son, Jesus, is in such good tune with the Father that he's synced up watches. They've synced up their watches. He's keeping time with the Father. And he says, it ain't my time. How many times he says, it's not my time. He is in with the Father. He spends time with the Father, and he knows what the Father has planned, so he doesn't fear man. He does not fear man. Even though man is trying to kill him, he just says, I'm out of here, not because I'm scared of you. He says, I'm out of here because it ain't my time, and you're ready to take and kill me. He even did that whenever some of the people were trying to make him king. He says, I'm out of here. It's not my time. It's not my time. Now, some had already made him king in their hearts, and that's where he was setting up his kingdom anyway. In men's hearts, that's where his kingdom was to be established. But a lot of people could not get that because not only could they not understand God's timing, they could not understand God's ways. Of the sovereignty of God, three things we're going to look at this morning is God's timing, for one, and number two, God's ways. God's ways are not our ways. He has a way of going about doing things that we may not understand, and his plan doesn't always facilitate our timing to understand and our ability to understand. In God's sovereignty, He has His timing, He has His ways, and He has His purpose. These three things we're going to look at today. God's timing, His ways, and His purpose. And we don't always line up with His timing. We don't always understand His ways. And we may not always get the big picture of His purpose. But that is the biggest challenge, to being a good sheep, to following God when we don't understand. See, it's easy to follow a plan that we understand. It's easy for us to follow a plan. We say, okay, I see that. The timing's right. I understand. I see how we're going to do this. And I understand the end objective. When we understand that, we're like, I'm all good to go. But see, that doesn't take faith. That doesn't take trust. We say, I can see it. But trust is whenever you can't necessarily see, know, or understand, but you say, I'm with you anyway. And we're going to be looking at that today. One of the first things is we pick up is Jesus has moved to Bethany beyond Jordan because it wasn't His time. Also, it wasn't His way to die. He wasn't going to die by stones. It was prophesied He was going to die on a cross. This was not going to happen the way the Jews wanted it to happen. It wasn't going to happen when the Jews wanted it to happen. And it wasn't going to happen for the purpose the Jews wanted it to happen for. We're picking up in John chapter 11 now in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. That's an interesting thing to note there, that John points out that this town of Mary and her sister Martha, their brother Lazarus has died. And he says, it's that Mary that anointed the Lord with fragrance of oil and wiped His feet with her hair. This is interesting because he's telling about something that happens in chapter 12, and here we are in chapter 11. Well, there's a few things to keep in mind. It's quite possible that there were two events, but regardless, one of the things we know is that when Mary anointed Jesus' feet, one of the things he says, everywhere the gospel is preached, what you've done here will be proclaimed. It's quite possible, we don't know exact dates because the scriptures doesn't lay it out, but it's very likely that John is the last of the four gospels to have been written. And here, it's a given that John is talking to his readers. He says, oh, you know that Mary. If you've heard the gospel, you know who Mary is, because anywhere the gospel is preached, Mary and what she did has been proclaimed. So it's like, we're going to go through the story, but you know what Mary I'm talking about. Yeah, that Mary, her brother Lazarus has died. Mary and Martha. Verse 3, therefore the sisters sent to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Who's sick? Lazarus, the one Jesus loves. When Jesus heard that, He said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Right there, we see one of these elements we're going to look at, and that's His purpose. He says, this sickness is not unto death. And what he's saying, this sickness that Lazarus had, the end of the story of Lazarus' life is not going to be that Lazarus got sick and died. That's not the end of this. There's a greater purpose, and this purpose is that God would be glorified. The Son would be glorified. Me, the Son of God, the Messiah, is going to be glorified through this sickness. God has a purpose that we may not understand. God has a purpose, but if we are going to be good disciples, followers of Jesus, we realize that I don't necessarily need to know how, when, or why. All I need to do is trust Him and follow Him. People, that's what we need to do. There's too many people who follow God as long as it makes sense. When we were doing our interviews on the streets here in Alvin, some of the times we came across, people began to say, well, they don't believe that the Word of God is perfect anymore. Well, part of the reason they don't believe that God is perfect and the Word is perfect anymore is they say, it doesn't line up with what I believe. It doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't address some of our issues. We embrace homosexuality in this country. We embrace that, but the Bible rejects. So the Bible must be wrong now. See, a lot of people accept God as long as it fits into what they believe. See, they have set a moral standard. They have their ways of doing things, and God is not lining up with their ways. So what they do is they abandon God. Or they will abandon part of God, which you can't abandon part of God. You abandon one piece of Him, you've abandoned Him all. But they begin with, because once you abandon and you say, well, this part of God I don't like, and that's what the world does today. I don't like this part of God about homosexuality. I don't like this part about God about drunkenness or about abuse or violence or sexual immorality, whatever it is that they have a hang up in their life, whatever their flesh desires. They have a tendency to take that attribute of God away, so as if God doesn't have a problem with it. Well, you know what you've done? You've now got a new God, because that ain't the God of the universe. That's not Creator God anymore. You have now set up a new God. You are now worshiping an idol that's made in your image instead of us in His image, because now instead of God being who He is, you say, my mind says that God should be this way or that way. My mind says that this is not right, this is not wrong, God is now, and you're making God in your image. Oh yeah. Do you know what that is? That's idolatry. You're worshiping another God. You may think that you're worshiping God, but He's not obliged to go out of His way and say, hey, you know, that ain't me. Because He says, if you want to know who I am, here it is right here. You've already turned away from who I am. I've already spoken to you. God has spoken to you. If you and anybody in this room, if you are waiting for God to speak to you, He has much to say, people. He has much to say. God is not silent in your life. God is not quiet in your life. He's not silent. He is not on mute. He's saying, you're not listening to what I already have to say, and you want something else, something different? I'm not changing who I am. I am who I am, and this is who I am, He says. And this is what we need to look at to know who He is. And He says that I have a purpose that's not necessarily the way you see it. When we come back to Lazarus, He says, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Well, Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. We know that. We've read this. Now, this is twice this has come up. What does that mean? What is that in there for? I like to think about it. I think it's not just there by happenstance. I contemplate the fact that let's look at Martha and Mary, and they're sending message to Jesus to say, and I can almost just imagine them saying, make sure you say the one you love. Like, let's approach Jesus. Our brother is sick, and when you go tell Jesus that Lazarus is sick, make sure you tell him, the one you love. I think it's beautiful. I do, because I think it's good that they have said, we know we have an intimate relationship with you. More intimate than many others. Yeah. Maybe I don't say my relationship is more intimate than another believer's, but there are a lot of people who are not Christians out there in the world who don't love God. And I think it's okay that when we go to God, we say, hey, I love you. You love me. We're in a relationship together, and I need you. It's okay to do that. I like the fact that the very writer of this gospel refers to himself not as John whenever he appears. He's one of the 12, so he's one of the three, Peter, James, and John. So he's in the accounts and in the stories in the gospels. But when he's talking about himself, he refers to himself as the one Jesus loved. I love that. Lazarus, the one Jesus loved. Mary, Martha, the one Jesus loved. When you go to God, you have the understanding of how much He loves you. It ought to change the way you approach Him. It ought to change the way you approach God, that when you approach Him, knowing He loves you. Let's approach God knowing that He loves us. Now Jesus, verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So verse 6, when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. You got to read that sentence again. Let's read that sentence again. When he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. That sentence says, as a result of this is what happened. He heard, it says, when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. Here's another attribute about the sovereignty of God. We just looked at his purpose. Now we're looking at his timing. He says, oh, he's sick. We're good. He waited 2 more days. Now, I think that Mary and Martha had anticipated that once they drop, the one you love, that Jesus is going to drop whatever he's doing and come straight to their need. And come straight and minister to their need. And come straight to heal their sick brother Lazarus. But Jesus says, it says right here, he stayed 2 more days because he works on his timetable. He stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, in verse 7, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. Well, if we look at this map right here, I think we got a map in there. Here is, you can see down here where Jerusalem is. And you can see over there where it says Jericho. And then over there, Bethany. This is the best we've got. There's the River Jordan running up there, north and south there. And that is where John had been baptizing. And this is where Jesus is, over in that area over there by Bethany. Over there, you can see where it says Perea. This is Judea. Jesus is over there. He says, let's go back over into Judea. So he says in verse 7, he says to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Jesus, did you not read John chapter 10? That's not exactly what they said, but that's what they're referring to. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and you're going there again. Remember what we had looked at in John chapter 10? They were taking up stones. They were ready to kill him. And now he's saying, I'm going to Judea. And the disciples are like, whoa, they're trying to kill you over there. They're already looking at things from their limited, non-sovereign perspective. For one, they think that man can supersede God's timing, his way, and his purpose. This is a very limited and distorted view and lack of trust concerning God. I mean, they should have more confidence in God's ability to know what he's doing. They've already declared that his disciples that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah. Does he not, with all of that, have the credibility to say, if I want to go to Judea, I can go to Judea? But they said, no, it's not good that you should go. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? The Father's plan supersedes measures for self-preservation. The Father's plan supersedes measures for self-preservation. I mean, if God tells you to do something, then you have confidence that his plan is going to be fulfilled, and you don't have to go around trying to prevent your demise. If God tells you to go walk on water, you walk on water. If God tells you to go into North Korea, you go into North Korea. If God tells you you go and you do something, and you don't worry about preserving your life as if God doesn't have a plan. That doesn't mean that we don't act smart, but we walk in obedience. We walk in obedience. God tells you to do something, and they are not understanding that the Father's plan supersedes any measures for self-preservation, because his ways are higher than our ways. His timing is perfect, and his purpose will not be thwarted. And we need to start living a life trusting God. Here's an example of trusting God. You're worried about if you do a particular thing God tells you to do, it might cost you your job. Well, you know what it might cost you? It might cost you a better job that God was going to give you when you got fired for this job for doing what he told you to do. I mean, it's just an example. It's just an example. Yeah, you just go ahead and stick with your plan over God's plan because you know better. Your timing's better. Your ways are good. You know what's up. Yeah, good luck on that. Come on. Let's submit to God, his ways, his plans. Well, Stephen, I don't know exactly what is. We'll come back to this. God's had a lot to say about what he wants and expects for you in your life. Start obeying this. Start walking in obedience to this regardless of what it may cost you. And believe that he has a plan, he has a purpose, he has the timing laid out, and he has a way that he wants to accomplish it. And he wants us to walk in obedience. They said, the Jews are trying to kill you, Jesus. Verse 9, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. This should sound real familiar to John chapter 9. We're not going to go there. But you remember in John chapter 9 concerning the blind man? They said, whoa, they see the blind man, and they said, Jesus, why is this man blind? Who sinned? His parents or him that he was born blind? Jesus said, neither. He says that I would be glorified through this. I got a purpose that doesn't make sense to you. They didn't give him option C. They didn't say, Jesus, is this man born blind because he sinned, his parents sinned, or because you're going to be glorified? They didn't throw that C out there because it didn't fit in their way. It didn't fit in their understanding and purpose. But God had a purpose, and he had a way, and he had a means that doesn't seem right unto man sometimes. But he says, I have a purpose. He healed the blind man, and the Son was glorified in this. God has a purpose, and he's going to receive glory in his purpose, even if it doesn't make sense to you. It did not make sense to the disciples. We need to start living for God, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when it doesn't add up. We don't have to put God on hold and say, God, I need to understand. I need to see how. I need to understand why. No, we need to start living. Jesus says, just follow me. We act like we want to be Christians. You know what his big command is? You know what he said? If you want to be my disciple, you must follow me. He did not anywhere in there say, you must understand exactly where we're going and how we're going to get there. No, he says, you just follow me. And a lot of people are following God as long as they can see where they're going. As long as they understand and know how it's going to happen. That's not trust. That's not faith. And he knows the difference between those who don't have that. They can call themselves Christians all day long, but a Christian follows him regardless. Here's a good example of it. And these things he said in verse 11. And after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I might wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. If he sleeps, he will get well. Okay, first right off, we said that 2 days had transpired. Okay, two days has happened. Now, if you look at a timeline, if you were to break this down, you'll see that most likely Lazarus died that day that they sent out there to Jesus. Lazarus has died, okay? And Jesus says, we need to go wake him up. So here it is. It's been 2 days. Lazarus is already dead. And Jesus says, we need to go wake him up. And the disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. So they're thinking, okay, last we heard Lazarus was sick, and now he's sleeping, he's getting rest. That's what you need whenever you're sick. Go get some rest, Lazarus. Go lay down, get some rest. They're thinking, we know what they're thinking about? They're like, they want to kill him in Judea. Lazarus is from Bethany. Let's look at the map again. There's 2 Bethanys. Really, it's most likely that this is also known as Bethsaida, but over there is Bethany over there beyond Jordan. Well, look at this other one, Bethany here. Where's that next to? Right next to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, it's less than 2 miles. That's what we read. And so they're like, why would we want to go there just to wake somebody up from their nap? That's not worth the risk if he's just sleeping. Well, Jesus knows that Lazarus has died. But he doesn't refer to it as death because he knows that death is, what did it say? We read this. It says that Jesus said in verse 4, this sickness is not unto death. Now, on the surface, people would say that Jesus is saying Lazarus is not going to die from the sickness. No, what Jesus is saying, death is not the finale of the circumstance. Death is not how this is going to end. This is not unto death. I mean, this is not where this is going. The purpose and the destination of this sickness is not death. The destination, along the way, we're going to go by death. But the destination is not death. The destination is the glorifying of the Son. That's the destination. So Jesus is not acknowledging to what man calls death. He does not acknowledge it to death. Jesus' ways are not our ways. His ways are higher than our ways. And here he is doing what he always does. He talks about things from the way he sees them, the real way, the eternal way. He talks about God's perspective on things. And God's ways and God's perspectives are not like man's perspectives. Matter of fact, we're going to read that in just a second. He says, but our friend Lazarus sleeps, in verse 11, but I go that I might wake him up. Then the disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death regarding the sleep. He spoke of Lazarus' death regarding his sleep, but they thought he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. What's happening? They're speaking two different languages. You get that? They're speaking two different languages. Jesus is speaking about Lazarus' death, and he refers to it as sleep because he knows this boy's about to get up. He refers to it as sleep, and his ways are greater than our ways. This is something that we see constantly. When he's talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, you remember we were there in John chapter 3, he says, unless a man is born again, he cannot see or enter the kingdom of heaven. Nicodemus says, how can a man be born again? Can he go back into his mother's womb? And Jesus is like, no, you're not getting this. I'm not talking about flesh and blood. I'm talking about spiritual things. But Nicodemus is speaking the man's language, but God's ways are higher than man's ways. When you go into John chapter 4, the same thing happens when he's speaking to the woman at the well. And he says, if you drink of this water, you will never thirst again. She said, give me some of this water. You got a pot to get water in, but give me some of this water. But Jesus talk about himself. He is the living water, and he's speaking about spiritual matters, but the Samaritan woman is speaking on earthly terms. Did Jesus not know that Nicodemus would not understand that? Did Jesus not know that the Samaritan woman was going to think of natural water? Did Jesus not know that these disciples were going to think about natural sleep or even natural death? He knew exactly, but God always starts out to let us know what we need to aim for. He says, I'm going to speak my language and I'm going to bring you to it. So you see, Jesus is all the time speaking spiritual matters, and the people have to come to him. But if they are hungry and thirsty for truth, the Spirit of God will draw them to the truth, not the other way around. Jesus is speaking, and then he would break down. He says, no, Nicodemus, that's not what I'm talking about. It didn't go the other way around. He didn't speak about the physical matters and then make them spiritual out of it. He speaks to the woman. He's making the spiritual matters and he brings her to it. And he speaks about a spiritual matter here and he brings them to it. He says, no, this is where you need to learn to be. My ways are not your ways. In Isaiah chapter 55, let's look at this. In verse 8, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, this is God speaking, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God has his way. He has his timing, and he has his purpose. And we conform, we abandon our plans, purpose, and ways because it won't fit. It does not fit. It's not the same. And many of us have not abandoned our own ways and our own purpose and our own timing to follow the one who has his timing, his ways, and his purpose. And we need to learn to trust God. He is sovereign. He's got this thing. He's got your problem. He's got your situation. He's got a plan. He's got a way out of your temptation. He's got a way out of your trial. He's got a way out of whatever's going on in your life. He's got a plan. He's got something He wants to accomplish. All things are working together for good. He's got a plan. He's ready. Are you willing? He's willing. And so what we need to stop doing is we need to stop trying to bring God down to our plans. We need to say, you know what? If this is a risky situation and we go into Judea where they want to kill us, we're going to follow you. If it means that I die, I still trust you, because what is the body whenever you save the soul? Whatever. God, your plan is good enough. Your purpose is good enough. Your ways are good enough. Your time is good enough. We subject ourselves. If you are our King, you are our God, and you are sovereign, how do we dare try to make Him fit to our plans and our purpose and our will and our timing and our ways? No. We abandon ours for His and trust Him. God's plan does not always leave time or ways for our understanding. There's this truth, okay? They tell you, and we occasionally get ice on the roads here, but they tell you that when you hit an ice pocket or whatever, part of the road that's frozen, usually whenever your vehicle's out of control, what's the first thing you do? You slam on the brakes. That's what you do. You want to say, let's stop this car. Well, that's the worst thing you can do when you hit ice, is slam on the brakes. But see, I should not have to. If we are driving down the road at 60 miles an hour, and let's say that you know how it works. You're from up north, and I'm from down south, and I don't ever drive on ice. And we hit ice and we start skidding, and I'm putting my foot on the brake, and you say, no, don't brake. And I should say, this guy knows all about how to drive on ice. I should listen to him, but something out of me says, no, I know better. I need to brake. There's this time where you don't have time as the passenger to say, well, let me tell you how the physics work here. I'm going to explain to you the law of physics. And what happens here is ice. And what the car, you don't have time for that. You say, no, trust me. My ways are better than your ways. You don't know what's going on. God is from up north. He's from above. His ways are higher than our ways. He's got this thing. What we need to do is, even if it means that we think we should brake when we should not brake, we say, I will follow you. I will obey you. We got to trust Him. Even whenever it's in the most nonsense way. In our sense, we think we brake when we hit ice. No, you don't do that. And God says, man, you just got to trust me even when it don't make sense, because God doesn't always have time to explain to you the law of physics. He don't have time to explain to you the law of the spiritual. He just says, follow me and this thing will be all right. But a lot of times that's where we abandon following Him, as long as it makes sense. But hit the ice when I'm out of control. Hit the brakes. Don't touch the brakes when I'm out of control. No, I can't trust you anymore, God. That's what happens. That's what happens. And we need to trust God, knowing that His ways are higher than our ways. He has timing. He has plan. He has purpose. Verse 14, then Jesus said to them plainly, I like this. It's the very same Greek word that they used when they came to Jesus in John chapter 10 when Jesus was at Solomon's porch. And he said, tell us plainly. And Jesus says, I'm going to speak to you. I'm not going to speak in a parable. I'm not going to speak to you in a mystery. Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Now, did something happen between this verse and the last verse? Did Lazarus die? Did he move from being asleep to death? No. Jesus says, okay, look, you're not getting this. I'm going to speak to you on your terms so that you can understand that Lazarus is dead. We are going to Judea. He is dead. I refer to him as sleep, but to you he's dead. So I'm going to speak something because you can't understand the spiritual matter. But these disciples, they're young in the Lord. Really they are. They're young in the Lord, and God has done a great thing, not because they're great, trust me. God's done a great thing because he has a plan and will and a purpose, and he can use fishermen to do what should have been the office of high priest or great prophets. No, he says, I will take these lowly fishermen. You know why? Because my ways are not your ways. My ways are higher than your ways. I do things the way I want to do, and they don't make sense to you. It did not make sense that God would use fishermen to change the world. And a tax collector who was hated, like Matthew, to change the world, but he did. And so his ways are higher than our ways. And here he is. He's dealing with people that have very limited spiritual understanding. And he said, we're going to go to Judea. And I love this. He says, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there. Meaning, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there to heal Lazarus of the sickness. I'm glad I wasn't there to heal him of the sickness. Now, not that Jesus is like, oh, now I see the plan. No, he knew the plan. He said from the beginning, this sickness is not unto death. The Son of God is going to be glorified. I'm going to be glorified. I'm going to show you that I'm God. I'm going to show you that I'm sovereign. I'm going to show you that my ways are higher than your ways. And I'm going to show you that my timing is perfect. There's an old song. Marvin says that there's a song that I grew up listening to. When God is 4 days late, he's still on time. Meaning he might be late to your situation and your timing, but when he's ready to move, it's perfect timing. You may have said, Lord, I needed to move in my marriage a long time ago. I needed to move in my financial situation a long time ago. God's timing is perfect. God's timing is perfect. So one of two things. If something has not happened to change your situation, either it's not God's timing and he's not done yet with you going through it, or he's waiting on you. Because we have a tendency to not obey God. And he says, man, by now, like Paul says to me, by now some of you should be teachers. Oh, we can. We can. Now, it doesn't mean that God didn't know we were going to delay the plan. He knew exactly we were going to delay the plan, but he was saying it didn't have to be this way. I'm ready to move. So God is either ready to move in your situation, but he's waiting on you to get things in line, meaning to repent, maybe to learn how to listen to him. Maybe he's been speaking to you, but his timing is perfect. And when he does speak to you, when he does tell you what to do, you just obey it. Now, here's the thing. Are you waiting for a word from God? Are you sure he hasn't already given it to you? Are you sure he hasn't already given it to you? There's a lot of things we think we're waiting on God. And if you talk to somebody about that situation that maybe is a seasoned Christian, they're like, whoa, bro, that answer's already in Scripture. You are not supposed to leave your wife for your neighbor. That Scripture, you don't need to wait on God. Are you fasting and praying for God to find out if you're supposed to leave your wife? No, you don't need to fast and pray. God has already spoken. You just ain't heard him. So we listen to him, but once he speaks, we obey that regardless of what we think and what fits into our mind. He says, I got a purpose, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, because I'm going to be glorified. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called the twin, I believe Greek or Aramaic Didymus, said, I think maybe your King James might say that, said to his fellow disciples, Thomas says, let us also go that we may die with him. Hey, you know what? I like the fact that at least Thomas says, I may not understand it. In my mind, we're all going to die, but hey, let's follow him. Hey, you know what? That's better than not following him. It's better to follow him and think you're going to die for it, but to follow him. You know, Thomas gets a bad rap because he's doubting Thomas. And we will look at doubting Thomas a little later, but I like old Thomas. He says, hey, man, if we die, we die. Let's follow Jesus. I like that. Are you willing to do that? That's Thomas saying, I don't have to understand everything. I'm just going to follow him. I'm just going to follow him. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Who had been in the tomb 4 days? Lazarus. God's timing. 4 days in the tomb. Oops. He's late, right? He's 4 days late. No, God's timing is part of his sovereignty. He had already been in the tomb 4 days, in verse 18. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem. We saw that on the map, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning the brother. Now Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Yeah, maybe. The reality is that because God had different plans, even if Jesus was there, doesn't mean he was going to heal him. But I guess he would have. That's why he said, it's a good thing I wasn't there. He told the disciples. He says, it's all in God's timing. It's all in God's plan. It's all in God's ways. And God had no intention of healing this sickness that Lazarus had. Now that flies in the face of some of the people that are out there today who don't believe God has a purpose in sickness. It's clear right here he did. It was clear in chapter 9 that he did. He said, no, this guy, this blind man, he's blind so that I can receive glory. Lazarus is sick so that I can receive glory. Lazarus is dead so that I can receive glory. So much for this mindset that people have, and it's being taught and has been taught even since this time, that God is not going to allow you to be sick. If you're sick, you're in sin. If something's going wrong in your life, you're in sin. No, Buffalo, read the scriptures. That's not the case. God has a plan, and he has a plan for your situation right now. He has a way. He has a plan. His ways are higher than our ways. He don't have to conform to Martha's expectation that if you'd have been here, he would not have died. But curiously, Martha says this. If you'd been there, my brother would not have died, in verse 21, verse 22. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. What? Where are you going with that? Where are you going with that, Martha? It's apparent here that Martha's saying, even though he's dead, something still can happen right here. She says, I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. What is she expecting that Jesus would ask of God? I don't know. I think she's just throwing out hope that maybe something is going to happen here. Either way, she's saying, I know that you can do whatever God has you to do. So Jesus responds to that in verse 23 says, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. I like this. Martha's like, okay, I need to clarify some things here because there might be some ambiguity here. She says, Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Okay. Martha knows that the Pharisees actually had the feel of the people better than Sadducees. The Sadducees were the aristocrats of the Sanhedrin. Remember that? This should sound real familiar if you've been coming on Wednesday nights because Wednesday night, this last Wednesday night, it was the Wednesday night before. Either way, we've talked about it on both nights about how Paul was like, whoa, I'm of the Pharisees. I believe in the resurrection. And so this is something that the Pharisees knew. And concerning God's sovereignty, he had a plan. And Martha's like, well, I understand that he's going to raise again because I believe in the resurrection. Just like Paul did. But of course, Paul's comes way later than this. He says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Almost like, is that what you're talking about, Jesus? Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection. The resurrection is before you. No, it's not just the fact that he was going to resurrect there. That's irrelevant that he had not yet died. He already is the resurrection. Resurrection is in me. I am the resurrection. I am the life. He's not saying I will be the resurrection. I will be the life. I am the resurrection is before you. We're talking about he will rise again on the resurrection. The resurrection is standing before you. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, we're going to look more at this next week because we're going to come back and double over some of these things, but we're going to continue. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, though your brother is dead, yet he will live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? He asked her, do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who has come into the world. That's actually not what he asked her. But I like the answer anyway. Because I think the answer, he says, do you believe I am the resurrection and the life? Do you believe that whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live? He says, do you believe this? And she says, I believe you're the Messiah, the Son of God. She said, I believe what I can believe and what I can understand. I believe that. I accept that. Everything else is up to you, whatever you want to do. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary her sister, saying, "The teacher has come and is calling for you." As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She's going to the tomb to weep there at the tomb." Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, word for word what Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Obviously, they had a conversation. You're like, let's plead with him. We know what his ability and his power is. But his ways are higher than our ways. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, "Could not this man," here's their logic, "could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" They're trying to figure this out. They said, this doesn't make sense. He could have prevented this. But God's got his timing. God's got his ways. His timing is better than our timing. His ways are higher than our ways. And he has a purpose. In verse 38. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "This is not our ways." Our way says this boy stinks. She says, "Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was laying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Verse 43, now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And we will pick up on that next week and see what happens. The reality is the scriptures teach us, Proverbs 3 and 5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. And acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your paths." Proverbs 14:12, "There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death." God is sovereign. He's got this. Let's trust him. He will move in his timing. He will move in his ways for his purpose. And I pray that we will all begin to trust him and know that our God is sovereign. Won't you stand?